Welcome to the third hearing of the committee's inquiry into the management, maintenance and operational issues at Calvary Mater Hospital, Newcastle. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name's Dr. Amanda Conn and I'm chair of the committee. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. Welcome, and thank you for making the time to give evidence again. Could each of you please state your name and title and swear either the oath or the affirmation?
Yes, thank you. Ashley DeBose, Work Health and Safety Officer at the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Hi, my name is Camilla Smith. I am a branch member for the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association at Calvary, and I swear that the evidence now I'm about to give by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement today?
Yeah, that's okay.
Go ahead.
Not so much of short, but anyway. So I came here again today more than 12 months after our members first contacted the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association regarding water leaks, mould and ongoing failures in infrastructure management at Calvary Mater Hospital, and 2 months after the first inquiry into these issues. In that time, what has changed? Very little. Despite repeated reports, escalating risks and clear evidence of harm, there have been no permanent controls implemented to make the building safe for patients, staff or visitors. The environment remains compromised and the fundamental issues that triggered the initial inquiry continue to persist. What has changed dramatically is not the building, it is the trust of the staff and the community. Their belief that they are safe when they walk through the doors of Calvary Mater Newcastle has been deeply shaken. The loss of confidence is now one of the most significant and harmful consequences of the ongoing infrastructure failures. The Section 81 meeting has led to some improvements in communication with staff, and cladding repairs have finally commenced on the southern end of the building. However, any meaningful action to address the systematic mould issues continue to be delayed. Report after report has been commissioned, each telling us the same thing: the HVAC system is not fit for purpose and requires replacement. Despite this consistent evidence, decisive action has not followed. The cycle of assessment without implementation has left staff and patients exposed to ongoing risk, and the core problem remains unresolved. It now feels to many members that we have been misled about the depth and extent of the non-conformities within the PPP, the priority placed on maintaining good working relationships and protecting financial interests rather than addressing the safety of patients and staff has once again fueled distrust and anxiety. When safety concerns are minimised, delayed or reframed to preserve contractual harmony, it sends a clear message to the workforce: their well-being is secondary. This perception is now deeply embedded among staff and is a direct consequence of the lack of transparency and decisive action within the PPP framework. We ask ourselves why a public hospital elsewhere can experience a mould outbreak and have it immediately addressed immediately. We're here at Calvary Mater Newcastle. We have involved the union, Safe Work, the Minister for Health, the Secretary of New South Wales Health, established a Section 81 meeting and now initiated an inquiry, yet we are still no closer to fixing the issue. Staff cannot understand how a problem so well documented, repeatedly escalated and universally acknowledged as unsafe can remain unresolved after more than a year. The contrast between the rapid response seen in other public hospitals and the prolonged inaction at Calvary Mater Newcastle raises serious questions and about priority, governance and accountability within the PPP model. There have been promises made again and again, yet little meaningful action has followed. In the meantime, patients, staff and the wider public have only become more fearful and increasingly distrustful of our hospital. Each unfulfilled commitment deepens the sense that safety is not being prioritised, and the gap between what is said and what is done continues to erode confidence in the system that's meant to protect us. We are repeatedly told that we are... Oh, sorry, I'm carling that out because I want to be quick. Staff are still the ones left to manage the consequences of these ongoing failures. We are the ones who must identify and report the mould or maintenance issues, complete the IMS and then follow up to ensure the work has actually been done and done properly. We are the ones who must ensure that the 150 HEPA filters across the hospital are switched on, clean and functioning, despite this being a critical engineering and facilities responsibility. The burden of maintaining basic environmental safety has been shifted onto clinical staff who are already stretched, and this is neither safe nor sustainable. In a health system already struggling to keep up with demand, working in a hospital that feels unsafe places enormous physical and psychological burden on our staff. We cannot continue to operate in these conditions without being affected, and many already are. There is a growing concern about the job security for staff, as this inquiry has raised serious questions about the $2 transaction and company liquidation. We need action, not more reassurances. We need to stop being disadvantaged because of the PPP model and our AHO status. At Calvary Mater Newcastle, we are doubly disadvantaged. We face the same pressures of every other public hospital, but without the same ability to respond quickly, transparently or decisively to environmental safety risks. This inequity is now directly impacting staff wellbeing, patient safety and the community's trust in the hospital.
Thank you for your statement, and I'm so sorry to hear that things haven't improved since we came to Newcastle back in March. It's really quite extraordinary. I have some questions, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well. There were a number of issues that the NMA raised with the committee back in March. One of them was the question of communication, that with all of these various safety issues for staff, that there had been issues with communication in the past. That really struck me as the lowest possible hanging fruit for immediate rectification. Do you feel like you're getting adequate communication from management about the ongoing issues?
There has been, since the Section 81, like I said, they've put out regular infrastructure reports, and we do have, as heads of department, we were having weekly meetings about what was happening, so that definitely has improved. There's been a bit of a gap since SDPR the last couple of weeks, but yeah, there has been more improved, but that's if people read their emails. So there's still not on that direct. I think there's still a lot of responsibility coming to bring the information down to the people on the floor every day. I think there's still gaps where the information doesn't always get to the people that need it, but they have put more information. The management have, yes.
Okay. You spoke to us in March and as well in your opening statement about nurses being required to do non-nursing tasks, and in March you talked about a guttering system with plastic sheets on windows funneling into garbage bins, and the nurses actually having to manage that. Is that still what's happening, and what are those sorts of tasks that you're being asked to do?
So the guttering system is in place now into the bin, so the plastic is gone and guttering is up, and so that we just basically have to, if it overflows or it's leaking, we have to still call the 5-1 help desk and get them to come and do something about it. But only on the 13th, I think it was, of May, they took the scaffolding down to put new scaffolding up, and then there was a big rain event, and then there was water everywhere. That was then our staff had to clean up because it was an immediate risk, and it was also on to one of the HEPA filters was directly under where the water leak was, and because it was overnight when there was no people there to check, it could have been it posed a very big risk, electrical hazard, as well as a risk to slip, trips and falls. So that guttering system has improved the management of the leaks, but it's still something that we have to still identify and make the calls and do the IMSs, like I say.
Okay, and it sounds like there hasn't been an increase in staffing allocation for yourselves or for cleaners to deal with those sorts of issues? They
have increased. There is a separate part of the Section 81 was for them to increase cleaning. They actually brought in cleaners from New South Wales Health to do mould remediation cleaning, and that has started to occur. There is still debates going on about how thoroughly the cleaning should replace, because what's happening is they're just cleaning the area of mould. They're not actually sorting out the room. So when the last Section 81 meeting, there was a lot of discussion around like the whole room, you walk into a room and there's dust everywhere, but yet, and they're meant to say, oh, we've cleaned the mould up, but the room's still dirty. It looks physically dirty. Is this safe for me to go in? So there's still issues with the cleaning.
Thanks. And the committee had also previously heard about outpatient areas and non-clinical areas being areas of concern. Is that still ongoing?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
So we'd previously talked about different areas of the hospital, and there was obviously the very high-profile ward closures. We had also previously heard concerns about outpatient areas and staff-only areas or non-clinical areas of the hospital. Is that still an ongoing concern?
Yeah, so they closed a bed in 5C I think it was last week. There was a bed closure because of the leaking in the air conditioning, with like water was coming through the air conditioning onto a patient. So there is still issues going on. And it's also that people have been displaced. So because the ward that's still closed, that's still 4 beds down, that those staff then split across 2 different area levels. Physiotherapy are then displaced into the new med building, which is an older building. So there is still a lot of displacement of staffing and making it very difficult. There's a bit of issue around privacy for the patients when they come to do their infusions, because they're in a physiotherapy room. So there's no segregation of like areas for the patients to have privacy, and there isn't a tea room on that level for the staff. So there is still things that we're working in conditions that are challenging, that we shouldn't be working in, with no real plan or timeline of when that's going to be resolved.
Thanks. Look, I've got loads more questions, but I'll go to my colleagues. Mrs. Connor.
Thank you both for being here. Just a couple of questions about the cleaning. So you're talking about inadequate cleaning generally, as well as inadequate mould cleaning?
Yeah, look, the HSU are probably the better union to talk to the cleaning, because that's not an area. I'm the nurses union, but what I can say is that there has been issues raised about the amount of people that they have to be able to clean, and unexpected. There's an increased workload, and that increased workload was making it challenging to do the job properly. If you're only getting 20 minutes to clean a room, and then that's not thoroughly clean a room, that's not really enough time. So but what was from the last Section 81 meeting was where they found surface mould, it was the whole room should be cleaned, and they are saying there's evidence to say that wasn't occurring. Only the mould was being removed, but not the room cleaned itself. So then staff walk back in there and think, well, is this still safe? And that's what is the issue.
I understand that there are cleaning protocols, there's standards that need to be met. Are they being met?
Look, like I said, I think I'd take that. That's something I think that HSU are better to answer that question, because that's their area of cleanliness. That's their area of, and I would feel more comfortable to say that. But I think there has been questions asked, about the level of cleanliness.
And just you personally, have you worked at hospitals that aren't subject to a PPP?
Yes.
And so is this a problem with inadequate cleaning and inadequate attention to maintenance, or is there some different factor in this hospital that's causing problems?
As a manager, it is very, like having been sitting in a managerial role, it is very challenging, the current setup, to understand and to navigate who does what and when, what constitutes basic maintenance, what constitutes a variation of contract, what constitutes a minor change, who's responsible for that, what the schedules of maintenance are.
So as a manager, what role do you have in contract variations?
Well, I don't, and this is the thing. So I'll put in.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, when that would be appropriate. Like, why are you concerned with contract variations?
Well, exactly, and this is why it's so complicated, because you put in if you want something hung on a wall, for example, that could constitute a variation of contract, which costs more money. That's the thing. So it's basically like, is it just general maintenance? Is it a variation? And is it a minor change?
In a Department of Health hospital, if you want something hung on a wall, what's the process there?
Well, you just ring up or request it throughout a system, and it gets done.
what's the timeline for it to get done?
Well, it's pretty much that whenever they can do it, like they'll give you a
Sure.
timeline.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
raise a ticket, you don't get the ticket doesn't get cancelled.
Yeah.
None of those things happen like they do.
So,
in this
so it's
hospital.
a different process.
Yeah,
and you were a
absolutely.
manager in a New South Wales Health Hospital?
I haven't been a manager in
Right.
I've been a clinical nurse educator, but I mean, I just
Right,
haven't
yeah.
I've never experienced the level of complication of trying to get things done and having to chase up things because your job's busy enough. And this is just with clinical, because one of the nurses that she gave a statement today, and they got told how to swip a trip because there was a hazard of electrical hazard in there, and it flicked off, the power would go off, so they actually got shown how to reset the power as nursing clinical staff. So I mean, there's things that you're being asked to do that you would never be asked to do in a purely public hospital.
So if a switch tripped in a public hospital, you'd have to wait for an electrician to come
Yeah,
in?
absolutely.
And what sort of delay would that involve for patients and everybody else involved?
Well, it depends where it is. I mean, is it urgent? If it's a clinical need, it's an urgent request, so that gets done immediately, unless they're on another immediate call. You know what I mean? So
Because I must admit, I know how to flip the switches at home if everything trips, and then you call the electrician,
Yeah.
sort of thing. But
Yeah.
but life goes on. So have you? Is there a protocol for that's different? That protocols in place at other public hospitals?
I don't know, but I'm assuming yes. Like, I mean, anything to do, if it's not in your scope, everything's about scope of practice. So if that's not in your scope of practice, you shouldn't be doing it, because it's different if it's your own home, because that's your response. You've got
I
ownership of
accept
that.
Yes,
But if it's a hospital and something happens to you, they're going to say, well, why did you do that when it was outside your scope of practice?
So essentially, the hospital is extending your scope of practice to include these things?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thanks. The questions from the government. Mrs. Suval.
Thanks so much for appearing again and for your opening remarks. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, I think in your opening statement, the 150 HEPA filters that are they new?
So some of them are new, some of them are we've got some industrial HEPA filters, but most of them are still bought, I believe, from Bunnings or some other company. They're just a everyday, not commercial grade HEPA filter.
But they have been, what I'm trying to understand is were all 150 of them or any of them there previously?
No, these are part of the interim control measures.
Yep.
As for the mould, the air sampling, the mould in the air conditioning.
And so has that number changed over time?
Yeah, so it's increased because as the area has increased, and this has been part of the many meetings of the Section 81, because they tested in 4 areas, it came up positive. So then the decision was made, we're not going to test everywhere, we're just going to assume that the mould is everywhere. But then they didn't put those intermediate stops, they didn't put the HEPA filters everywhere within the hospital. So it's like, well, how can you say you can't have it both ways? You can't say, hang on a second, there's mould throughout the whole hospital, but we're only going to put the HEPA filters in certain areas over certain times. So it's been a long process. So it's a risk assessment, like everything, they do a risk assessment, and then they decide where the need of the HEPA filters and which type of HEPA filter goes where.
Okay. I wanted to also ask about the QFM monitoring system, because that's something I think we heard about in previous evidence. I understand there may have been some changes to the processes of that. Is that something that you can explain for the committee, or has that improved at all?
Yeah, look, because we got the Safe Work PIN notice, they do now send, when you raise a QFM, they give you the number. If it's through, if it's a request via email, you get the number straight away. If it's a phone call through to the help desk, you don't always get the number of the call. They have to call you back with the number. You then do get a statement of what they have done and that it's closed, and you do have the opportunity to then say, no, that's not done properly enough. So there is more oversight now that there was before, but it's still a challenging, convoluted system, because you have to then also do an IMS, because the hospital, Calvary, want to keep track, because they don't manage the QFM
QFM,
system, so
yep.
they've got no oversight over what's happening. So
Right.
what we have to do is put the QFM in, then we have to do an IMS as well. So you can, it's
It's a
just
fair bit of work.
increased workload. Yeah.
Then how much time would that take?
Well, it depends
say?
how significant the issue is. Like if
Yeah.
it's mold in an area that you found mold, then you have to write a detailed summary. If it's like, the tap's leaking, you know what I mean? It's not as big a issue.
Yeah. I wanted to ask as well, you mentioned earlier about, specific cleaners being brought in from New South Wales Health. Have there been any other sort of staff deployments in nursing areas to supplement the work that you're already doing, to your knowledge?
Not well. I can speak to my department.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
there hasn't been to deal with the increased workload of the maintenance issues. No.
Okay. And in terms of the sort of the increased or changed workload with, say things like HEPA filters and various other things, has there been any enhancement to your staffing levels to allow you to better do that work, or?
No, and this is the point that I thank you for raising this, because so when we had a meeting, what the biggest issue is the loss of the 4 beds. So that ward was
4 beds where, sorry?
like in 5D, that was
Yep.
where we would have extra surge beds within the winter capacity. So when the need opened, those beds get flexed open.
Yep.
Those beds are now gone.
Yep.
So we were assured by the Minister and by Susan Pearce that we would get access to more help and funding to offset that loss of beds, which we still have not been given. So, and I think that's the thing. So this is where you start moving into all with promises of help, but there's not actually that support there.
Okay. And in terms of you obviously that you're in the theatres part of the hospital. Has there been any change to, the throughput for theatres in terms of the number of cases you're able to sort of get through because of any of the stuff that's going on, or?
There was when the unit, when the ward got closed and we had to move down the 5D patients into recovery, that stopped theatres for a couple of days, so surgeries were cancelled. But I think it's more about the look, because we are a cancer hospital and our tea room is at the end of the hallway, and when you're getting wheeled down to have your operation and you see gutters with a funnel into a big garbage bin, you kind of would be thinking, what's going on here? So I think it's more about, and then in one of our recovery bays, that's also the situation as well. And it's not something that we should be accepting in a hospital system, and especially in a place where immunocompromised patients are coming for surgeries.
I think just on top of that, Camilla, there's a lot of pressure on theatres to provide care for people that wouldn't usually be in theatres. So we call those patients outliers. So they're not actually peri-op patients. They might be someone needing a ward bed, and parts of theatres were being opened up as a ward to manage the bed closures across the hospital.
Yeah.
Just a final question from me, just on any suggestions that you have for improvement in the sort of short term, medium term, long term. Is there anything tangible? It sounds like there have been some changes with the Section 81 meetings, communication, things like guttering as opposed to plastic sheets, the cladding work. But is there anything else that you would suggest, or at least like the committee to look at in terms of that?
I just think that there needs to be, because the current building assessment that's being done was meant to be resulted, like the results are meant to be given, my understanding was this month or next, and that's now being prolonged till the end of some unknown time towards the end of the year. So this then means that all of what's happening currently is continuing. The ward is still closed. Our staff are still working split across 2 places. The patients coming in are still having to be in environments that aren't really set up for what they're being used for, and I think that needs to really be looked at, and that if we get to a point in this coming months of winter that we're surging into recovery, we should be getting support. That should not be happening, because it's not safe. It's not fair for the patients that are there, but it's also not. It's a closed environment for a reason. So I think that, you know, if the ministers were promising support and then staffing and whatever that looks like, then that we should be getting that from the district, not just being left to our own devices. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. That's all from me.
The committee was just informed earlier today about this new guidance about reducing the risk of aspergillosis in hospitals, and in its introduction, in terms of who the document is intended for, on that list it has units caring for patients at high risk, including bone marrow transplantation, haematology transplant units and cancer services. So my assumption is you're part of the intended audience of this document.
Yes.
Were you consulted or involved in its development? Has this been communicated to you?
So which one is it?
This is the new guidance on reducing the risk of aspergillosis in hospitals. It seems very relevant to the matter.
I haven't. No.
I can't be certain. I don't have it in front of me. There was some consultation, I'd say about 2 months ago, with some communication documents about the risk of mould exposure. I can't remember if there was one specifically on aspergillosis or if it was just more broad. Okay. But it did go into FAQs for people about what would exposure look like.
Okay. This new policy goes on to talk about environmental sampling for fungi. It says that surface sampling is rarely indicated. Air sampling is rarely indicated, with some exceptions, and one of those exceptions is hospital renovation or construction. I think given the infrastructure issues at the Mater, it seems likely that you would fall into that category of air sampling being indicated. Are you aware of that going on? Are you given results of air sampling?
They have been given results of the sampling. We finally, through the last few months in the meetings, Section 81 meetings, they have provided all of the sampling that they have been doing. So the last results were April, but I don't know what the risk assessment said about when they were doing the panelling, fixing the panelling on the outside of the building, whether that meant that triggered it needed to be done inside where they were working. Like, it hasn't been done in theatres again since that work has commenced. I know that, but I don't know. That's all I can really speak to. I don't know if you know more, Ash.
We've definitely been we got all of the backdated air sampling results, which was good. We are getting up-to-date sampling results, most of them being tape sampling results. So, you know, if people do think they see mould, they'll do a tape test on that area. But in the last Section 81 meeting, there were concerns raised by HSU members about why air sampling has not been happening. So I can't be sure if they have done any recently.
Okay. Thank you. Well asked, Health, this afternoon. My last question is an optimistic one, and I appreciate it might need to be taken on notice. But if the management of the Mater was actually fully brought back into public hands and staff needed to transition to be New South Wales Health employees, what sort of considerations should we be giving to that transition and the needs of nursing staff? And I'm thinking about things like access to service histories, leave balances. What else should be on that list?
We'll definitely need to take that on notice, but very happy to bring that stuff back to you, because it is very important. And I know that that's something that has caused a lot of anxiety for not only our members but all staff. There is a lot of confusion about what is going to happen in the near future and how that will affect employment for people.
Yeah, thank you. We'd be really interested to hear your recommendations and advice for how that should be managed.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, there's only 1 minute left. Is there anything else that you wanted to raise that you haven't had the opportunity to?
I just want to say thank you for allowing us time and space to say what we need to say and hope that something good comes from this, because, it's been hard and challenging.
Thank you. We really appreciate the time and effort you've put into to supporting the inquiry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you so much for making the time to give evidence for the third time.
No problem.
Could you again state your name and position title and swear either the oath or affirmation?
James Ward. I'm a director on the Novacare Group of Companies. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Victoria Rigg. I'm director on the Novacare Group of Companies. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Do you have an additional opening statement on this occasion?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'll start with one question from me, and I'll go to my colleagues. My question is about the quantum of the abatements. So we've had some conflicting evidence, which I'm trying to unpick. In our first hearing, you told us that in 17 years you thought that less than $5 million worth of abatements had been withheld. But we've also had correspondence provided and tabled referencing 177 million of disputed abatements. That's obviously a difference of an order of magnitude. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah. So those numbers are obviously describing very different things. And I suppose it's probably worth noting that all those numbers are disputed. So in a sense, Honeywell's view is that number would be zero. The state's view is that number is much more, and it's now all the subject of an abatement. So we will obviously leave it to the experts to decide what the number should be. The evidence we provided was correct. So we were asked how much had been withheld from the project, and that number is less than $5 million has been withheld from the project, as far as we're aware, since inception. We haven't been involved with the project for the entire duration, so we're not 100% sure what happened before our involvement. But that $5 million is disputed and is the subject of an arbitration. In addition to that, a number of abatements have been raised by the state that have been disputed and haven't been imposed. As I said, that number changes every month. It's a number that, as far as we're concerned, the number quoted by the state is black and white incorrect in accordance with the contract, but it's very hard to know what the correct number is, and that's something that the arbitrator will have to decide.
Okay, thank you. To my colleague.
Can I ask a follow-up question? You just said, I think, that number changes every month. Who's changing the number every month?
So the way that sorry, I'll try and sit forward so you can hear me.
Yeah,
the way
you
that
can probably pull the mic closer to you if that's easier.
The way the contract works, every month there is a specified scope that is required to be provided, and there are KPIs that set the service levels that are required to be met. Every month, the project will report against those against the service specification, confirming the services have been provided and outlining any.
If I can just, and that report goes to.
It goes to HAC, so it's part of the invoicing process. Through that, the complexity with PPPs is that any time a service isn't delivered in accordance with the standard, depending on the consequence of that failure, it triggers a different regime around how quickly you need to respond to it and how quickly you need to rectify the problem. So there is a dispute around whether that part of the contract has been correctly applied and whether when an incident occurs it is something that needs to be rectified within half an hour or something that can be rectified within a month. That then triggers a whole sequence of there's then other arrangements where if, for example, something can't be rectified within a period of time because you need to source a part from overseas or even interstate, then there's a period where you can apply for an extension of time. The question of whether that extension of time is appropriately granted is also under dispute, because that then triggers whether or not you get penalised for not having rectified an issue within time. And so all those things get debated, and then at the end of the month, if we can't agree, the state just imposes the highest number they can come up with under the contract as a proposed abatement, which then has been disputed and left in dispute. So, which is why the numbers change every month, because each month there is a further dispute around what has and hasn't happened.
Right. And
So can I just ask a clarifying
sure.
question? So the upper limit number you're saying is the amount that Health has alleged, and that previous evidence about $5 million worth actually being withheld. Does that mean the difference is what Health has said is necessary but hasn't actually been withheld?
No, so there was a period
3 years
3
ago.
years ago where Health started withholding. So the way that most PPPs work, if there is, and it's normal, the whole regime is set up to incentivise performance. It's not intended to penalise. So it's not meant to be a penalty, because obviously at law you can't impose penalties on people for failing to deliver under a contract. So the way it normally works is something will happen, there'll be a small financial consequence on the operator, which often gets invested back into the facility that's being delivered, and life moves on. In this case, we had a long period where there was no financial implication because the money wasn't withheld, because it was disputed. Then we went through a period probably of a year when the state withheld significant amounts of money from the project. I think in the hope that it would have an impact and change performance, but unfortunately the dispute was never resolved at the same time, and so that I think it was about $3.4 million I think was withheld from the project over a period of about 12 to 18 months, and then since then no money has been withheld, so the abatements have just been in dispute, because the issue is if the arbitrator finds for Honeywell, then the state will be required to pay significant interest on the amount that was withheld. So there is obviously a risk to the state in not paying until an arbitrator has decided what the actual interpretation of the contract should be.
Thank you. Sorry.
yeah, no, that was interesting. And is there an expected date for the arbitration to be concluded?
I'm not close enough to it. There was a hearing earlier this week, I believe. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about. I'm aware that confidentiality restrictions obviously don't excuse me from telling the truth here.
Yeah.
I just don't know how that relates to an arbitration.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thank you. My other question, well, I suppose two questions that flow from that. So if the PPP process is that you are constantly reporting to the HAC, then there is a constant monitoring by the HAC about the performance of the contract, and so any concerns, there's a mechanism there to raise those concerns. And have they been an active player in raising concerns they had about performance standards at Calvary?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues at Calvary, I think, are well understood, and not just through monthly reports that are written and submitted, but more through the monthly PCG and operations meetings that are all attended by HAC and Calvary representatives. So I think the issues are understood. I think the issues being that no one's actually progressed the disputes to a resolution. So the question around how to resolve issues, it comes down to whether it's within the scope of the PPP or not. And until someone resolves the question of whether or not this is a service that was required to be delivered under the PPP, it's very hard to come up with a solution.
So if I can just bring it back to the immediate trigger for this inquiry, which was mould and other issues, is there any serious dispute that it's not appropriate at a hospital to have conditions where there's mould, especially in patient areas?
I don't think that's in dispute. I think the question in dispute is the fix. So
Right.
the state, the Honeywell has proposed a number of variations, which I think they've provided information on in their evidence as to how they believe the problem should be fixed. I understand the state has also carried out its own inquiries, although we don't have as much transparency around that. But ultimately, the biggest problem areas are buildings that were built last century before the PPP. So it is upgrading, and I also understand actually physically changing old buildings that were built prior to the PPP's existence. And that's where the dispute is, because they weren't part of the buildings that were delivered in the PPP.
Right. Just a different question. Last time you appeared, you informed us that you'd made an offer to the government. What conversations or meetings have you had in relation to that offer following that?
We've had a number of conversations, general conversations around what we do next, so not specifically around the offer, but around how do we move forward from where we currently are. But given the situation, the financial position that Novacare is in, realistically, most of those, we are part of those conversations, but not all of them, because a number of those conversations are between the bondholders and the state directly. But we're all working towards finding a solution which allows Novacare to continue to operate and avoid voluntary administration.
So specifically, what conversations have you had with the state in relation to the offer that you made?
As in the number of meetings? Or
Well, for example, did you meet with Health? Did you meet with Treasury?
So both. So the meetings are with both Health and representatives from both Health and Treasury and their legal teams.
And those meetings were held before the state declined the offer?
No.
They were held after the... So the chronology would be you made the offer to sell, the state said no thanks, and then Treasury met with you.
Yes.
Yes.
That's an unusual process, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and have you been given reasons from either Treasury or Health why they've declined the offer to sell back to the state?
I think I think it's been, and it's hard to remember what I've read in the press, which is generally not particularly accurate and what has actually happened. But the feedback we got was that given the time available, the state wasn't able to properly consider the offer because we had said we wanted a response by the 30th of April, because that was the date when we lost our asset management team, the team of people who actually run Novacare, as Novacare has got no employees. We were actually able to find someone else to come and replace them, which has allowed us to keep operating, which we're pleased about. But
in your commercial experience, if a deadline was the issue, it would be more usual to enter into negotiations and say, we want to explore this issue, but we can't do it by the deadline, rather than, as the state has done, simply say, no, thank you?
Generally, yes. But I do appreciate that, the environment that James and I generally work in is very different to the environment that the New South Wales government works in. So I think it's hard to compare general commercial transactions with the state working through the processes that they have to work through.
But in any sort of bona fide negotiations, you would expect a willingness to talk rather than a negative answer and then coming to talk to you after the negative answer? It seems an unusual process if there's a bona fide negotiation on foot.
Perhaps it's you know, it's hard to know. I don't think it's really our place to comment.
No, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just one clarifying question from me, and then I'll go to the government. You were telling me about the timeline of the funding not being withheld initially, and then funding being withheld. Do you remember what year that was, or are you able to find that?
It was so funding stopped being withheld in early 2024. I think about March 2024, and it was probably for the 12 to 14 months prior to that money was withheld every month.
Okay, thank you.
So just for clarity, funding still did continue to be paid by the state to the project. The portion that was withheld was the service payment that otherwise would have gone to the subcontractor Honeywell. So 100% of that was deducted.
Okay, thank you. Is this Isabel?
Sorry, how much money are we talking about if we're talking about 100% of the service contract?
So Honeywell gets about
$3.7 to $4 million for the period of time that it was.
Each month?
No,
No,
it's
for the
about
whole-
300,000-ish
Thank you. Thank
per
you.
month.
Thank you again for appearing today. In your correspondence to the Chief Executive of Hunter New England Local Health District on the 13th of April, excuse me, you indicate that there are 177 million disputed abatements. Is that still the case?
No, that number's now larger.
Sorry?
That number is now larger.
How much is it now?
I can't tell you exactly, but it's
Ballpark? It's very bad timing.
no, this one, because that one hasn't been invoiced. It's about
That's just the year to date. That's
I don't know. It's close to $300 million.
So closer to $300 million
Yeah.
in disputed abatements as of now in June,
Yeah.
as opposed to the 13th of April. That's quite a significant difference.
And just put in context, so this hospital cost about $150 million to build, and over the remaining, and per year the state pays about approximately $40 million a year to Novacare to both provide all the catering, cleaning, maintenance, and to service the debt that the state indirectly borrowed. So it's a bit like repaying your mortgage at the same time as paying for all the services. And most of that money, the majority of the $40 million goes to MediRest to pay for the catering and cleaning, which is by far the largest portion of the services that are delivered at the hospital.
Sure, thank you. So given that, in terms of the volume of disputed abatements, which is now 300 million, at the time you wrote to Health with the offer or the options, I think, from the EY Parthenon analysis, which included the $2 transaction or suggested $2 transaction. Can you understand why that would not present value for money for the New South Wales taxpayer to take on a liability of 177
not at all, because
million?
it's not a liability. As we said, these
It's
numbers.
a potential liability,
It's not
though.
If you look at the contract, black and white, it cannot be that.
So
it
what is
cannot
it
be
then?
that high. As I said, that's a question for the arbitrator, and it's the arbitration. There's about 4 or 5 different disputes that will need to be settled by the arbitrator to come up with that number.
Okay.
But the number is, that's why I provided the context. So the number is not even close to that number, and
Not even close to
No.
300 million?
No.
Or 177 million?
no, not even close to either of those numbers. I think we're talking about realistically, if you look at the cost, what this process is meant to be doing is reflecting the impact for the failed services. Honeywell, and we're only talking about Honeywell services. Honeywell's paid $300,000 a month to provide these services. So there is no way in this world that the liability could be anything near the number that is currently being alleged, but equally it's not a liability. So this is a contractual mechanism. So,
but it's enough for you to consider voluntary administration options.
No, that's the liability, the pressure of the constant dispute and the cost of managing the disputes, not the liability itself. The cost of managing the disputes is the issue that's putting financial pressure on Novacare.
Right.
Also, if you think about this, all the liabilities. So the project itself is already on the state's balance sheet. So the future payments, which cover all the maintenance to be required under the hospital, full repayment of the debt, all the payment for the services to be provided in the hospital over the next 7 years, that's all on the state's balance sheet already. So they're already liabilities that the state has. So there are no new liabilities that are created by a contractual dispute. It's very easy to come up with a number and make it sound really big and then try and negotiate down from it, which is where I expect we'll head. But realistically, it's not a reflection of the contract.
But we're supposed to just accept that it's not actually that number without knowing what the actual number is?
But the problem is that it is that is the nature of a dispute.
Yeah, I know,
so
but you're asking one party to take on a dispute with only half the information.
If you think about the issues at the Mater that need resolving, the real question should be, and I understand that the state is looking at some work around how much money does the state want to spend to put the hospital in a state that it wants the hospital to be in, which is completely regardless of the PPP, which is the process that's currently happening. Then, does any of this fall within the PPP? Honeywell's answer is no. And then the question is, well, if it's outside the PPP, that's very easy to resolve. There is a variation mechanism within the PPP that Honeywell has already proposed to use on a number of occasions, which would rectify all these issues. And the numbers that Honeywell has proposed in their rectifications are not significant.
In your correspondence with Hunter New England Health, Mr. Ward, you acknowledge an email from Tracy McCosker, and these are your words. You say, I'm sure you appreciate this is an unusual situation. In any normal transfer, due diligence is customary and serves a number of purposes. And then you go on to say, a clear statement of intent from HAC, preferably in the forms of a heads of agreement, would hopefully provide enough comfort to the bondholders and other stakeholders to allow Novacare to remain operational. So you acknowledge that it's an unusual situation that you've asked of the New South Wales Government and Hunter New England Health in terms of not being able to conduct due diligence before accepting, an unknown, disputed figure of liabilities in your email.
I don't think that's what I'm referring to there. I'm referring to the actual transaction itself, that these disputed abatements, again, remembering that to the extent that we go through this dispute process and whatever the number is, what do we say, $300 odd million, the worst case scenario from the state's perspective, if they lose all that, is they don't get to charge that $300 million through. So it's zero. It's either a positive number, it's not a negative number. So it's not a liability.
I'm not sure I agree. In terms of your correspondence, you also go on to say we expect you'll have some questions or require some information, particularly around Novacare's current financial position, which is still a mystery to us, what the current position of Novacare actually is. It would be good to have that information, but unfortunately it was redacted from all of the minutes that we received as a committee. You go on to say that would best occur after health have agreed basically to proceed with the transfer.
Provided an indication.
So we'll show you our books, but not until you agree.
So just to be clear,
is that how it works?
No, so just take a step back. So when this transaction,
that's how it looks.
This is again unique. That the only place we earn revenue from is from the state. The financial model that is the backing for the basis of this PPP, the state has. You know our financial situation. You know every dollar that we receive. You know every dollar that goes out the door. You receive our
But we've
accounts.
asked for your financial report. You've
You
redacted
receive
that
our,
information
no, you
from
receive
your
our
board
financial.
meetings.
You receive our
Nobody
financial
asked for-
reports every single year.
You've redacted it from the information you
Because
provided
the
it.
the financials of Novacare were not part of the scope of this.
Well, could you
of this
provide that on notice
parliamentary
then?
inquiry.
Can you provide that information on notice to the parliamentary committee, the financial
I don't
reports?
believe that financial reports going back multiple years are relevant. I don't know.
Well, that's for the committee to determine.
how-
That's a question from a committee member to yourself. It's not, it's not up to you to determine what is or isn't relevant.
So you want our audited accounts for the last however many years? Is that what you're looking
They're
for?
all, yeah, we can
that's fine.
absolutely
We can.
provide.
We
our
already
audited
provide that to
financial
the
statement.
state, so we're happy to do so.
Thank you. That's very helpful
Can
to
I just jump in
understand.
and ask a follow-up
Sure,
question?
please. Yep.
So, what was being offered to the state, was that Novacare as a business with its financial assets and liabilities, or was that the hospital that Novacare is currently running?
We don't own the hospital.
Okay, so therefore, but you weren't offering to sell Novacare to the state, were you?
Yeah,
Yes,
we
we
were.
were.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So you're selling Novacare
Yes.
with its financial responsibilities?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
No,
Yep.
all good. In terms of the EY Parthenon report, is there a reason you have you provided that to Health unredacted?
Yes.
The options analysis report.
No, not
Not unredacted.
no.
Is there a reason for that?
Because that was what EY told us we could provide.
So, again, you've provided a redacted options analysis report that you've commissioned, EY to do, but you're asking the state government to accept, a version of that that you've, and we'll just accept whatever other risks
we
come with
didn't
it.
actually ask the state to do that. We asked the state to provide an indication of whether or not they would like to continue, they would like to proceed with a sale before we went through the process of providing them with financial information
So
to
why-
save everybody
But
time.
what is it that this report says then that you're so sensitive about? Is there a reason you can't provide the Schedule 1 EY Parthenon report, options analysis
that has
and
been,
contingency planning?
so that has been provided to the state.
And the, have you provided the full EY
No,
Parthenon report?
EY required part of it to be redacted.
Why is that?
You'll have to ask EY that question.
Wouldn't that be useful for, the people of New
Realistically-
South Wales to understand, given it's taxpayers' money that's probably paid for the report?
It's not taxpayers' money that paid for the
But if
report.
Novacare have paid for it and you've just said that, we hold all your debt and you're out, how is it not?
Novacare's a private enterprise that was provided funding to build the hospital, which is a state asset. As part of the PPP, Novacare, the money that Novacare provided, both through debt and equity, is repaid over a 25-year operating period.
So who are your, you talk about not providing dividends to your equity investors for 3 years, and you mentioned your bondholders in the correspondence to Hunter New England Health. Who are your equity investors and bondholders?
The bondholders, we don't know who the bondholders are. They are, they sit behind as is common, they sit behind a security trustee. So a large number of, from what we understand, large number of small mum and dad investors who invested in what they believe were quasi-government bonds at the time that the PPP was entered into back in 2004, which is standard for this kind of arrangement. The bonds were rated by Moody's as part of a very much based on the fact that it is effectively backing a state government cash flow.
Do you have the full EY Parthenon options analysis and contingency planning report?
Not in a form that I am permitted to disclose without their permission.
Is that something that you could provide to the committee on notice?
I can request permission from EY to disclose it, yes.
That would be good, thank you. What is the updated likely timeline or potential consequences of any voluntary administration that you're facing?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, fair to say that the reason you've written to Health and asked them to consider a takeover is because you're facing a voluntary administration?
Yeah.
Do you have any update to provide on that to the committee in terms of your level of solvency?
We're still in, as I said earlier, we're in a position where we're working with both New South Wales Health and the bondholders to try and ensure that Novacare remains solvent so that we can work through a solvent solution.
You mentioned at the outset some of the issues between your stated solvency was the amount spent on sort of legal expenses and consultants and otherwise. Are you able to provide the committee with a breakdown on the amount of money you've spent on consultants and a breakdown of who they are?
I don't know what I can't give you the numbers, but we have both legal advisors and financial advisors. I would need to take advice around legal professional privilege before I disclose anything further, because I wouldn't want to.
Or how much that's cost you? Surely it sits on your balance sheet somewhere as a liability.
That's not how.
So you're saying you can't tell us how much you're currently spending?
No, I don't have the number in front of me.
Okay.
It depends on what is actually happening. The abatement arbitration is significant. The High Court the High Court proceedings that we've got on foot against Lend-Lease also are at significant cost. The responses to letters in respect of breach notices are significant. So I would have thought probably looking at $100,000 or $200,000 a month on legal fees.
In your letter to Health from the 13th of April, you also said that the expenses currently exceed revenue as a consequence of the legal costs and litigation, and you've got a forecasted cash flow shortfall. Given we're here in June, and I can only expect that situation hasn't changed. What is your current situation now in terms of your forecasted cash flow shortfall? Has that worsened? Has it improved? How much so?
It's very much stayed the same. So we continue to spend more than we receive in revenue. Having not paid distributions to equity for a prolonged period, we have money sitting in the bank account that we're currently spending. Part of the proposal to the state was that if the state had taken on Novacare, then they would have had access to the money in the bank accounts, which they could have utilised to put the money back into the hospital, rather than it being spent on legal fees, which was one of the concerns we have around an arbitration, a voluntary administration, because the moment any enterprise ends up in financial difficulty, the level of advisor costs accelerates.
Yep, understood. So you mentioned there that you're using cash savings to pay dividends.
No, we're not paying dividends.
So
we're using money that could otherwise have been paid in dividends to cover costs.
Okay, sorry, my misunderstanding. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I've lost my train of thought now. I'll go back to the chair to see if you have any further questions before I continue on.
Look, I only had one, which was in answer to a few questions ago. You mentioned the bondholders, and I understand that there was some change in who the bondholders were between the initial agreement and now. Could you clarify who the current bondholders are?
We don't know.
We don't know.
So we have a relationship with a security trustee who is the representative, administrative representative of the bondholders. We are speaking to a number of people who hold bonds, but we don't know who all the bondholders are, and the people who we are talking to aren't actually the beneficial owners of the bonds. They're financial advisors and financial managers or fund managers who invest in bonds for a living, so they would hold a portfolio of bonds on behalf of mum and dad investors.
Thanks.
I remember my question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was about, you mentioned plenary group, and obviously their deadline of 30th of April, but you've managed to find a group to come in. Who is that?
It's a group called Active Infrastructure.
And so they're providing the support for Novacare, or the staff for Novacare, if you like. What does that look like in terms of staffing and cost?
So they have a team of 3 people that we deal with directly. It's largely, I suppose there's two. The role, I'd say, you can split into 2 parts. One is the contract management, both managing the contract, the project deed with the state, and managing the contracts with the subcontractors, both Honeywell and Materrest, and being the go-between between the two, which involves site visits and regular communication with both parties. And then the other side of it is the more I suppose back office side of running any company, so an accounts team, company secretarial team, everything that's required to manage all the debt. There's quite significant debt administration tasks on this project, so they do all that work.
Okay, thank you. In terms of your own appointments, and I just want to clarify, the board or the directors for Novacare group of companies are yourselves, the two of you. That's it.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's no other board, there's no other directors, there's no other oversight. It's just the two of you.
Correct.
Yep. There's no fixed terms.
Correct.
Yep. And you've, Ms. Rigg, you were appointed in 2014, and Mr. Ward, you were appointed in 2016. Is that correct?
Yep, sounds right.
You've both been directors of Novacare group of companies for some time now, it's fair to say, and abreast of the issues. I also understand you don't receive any remuneration from the Novacare group companies for the work that you do. Is there any other in-kind support, compensation or otherwise that you receive for being directors of the Novacare group of companies?
Not from the project, no.
Not from the project? Do you receive it from anything else?
Well, we're employees of, so we're infrastructure investors. We invest in infrastructure. Part of our role is to manage the infrastructure that we invest in. Okay,
so you're infrastructure investors, but you're also on the board that's overseeing the investments. And so I'm just trying to understand how that doesn't amount to a sort of a conflict of sorts. If you're infrastructure investors and you're managing, investments that bondholders and equity and other, then how is it that as a director of a company that is not a conflict?
If you look across Australia, most company directors would be representatives of the owners of the companies, which is exactly what we are. And so...
Do you have investments in Novacare group companies, both yourselves?
No.
No.
Okay. And you say you're employees. How are you employees if you're not receiving any money?
We're not employees.
Okay.
We're company directors.
We're fund managers who work in the infrastructure space. So as part of our role as fund managers, we manage investments for mum and dad investors. And part of that is superannuation funds, so indirectly mum and dad investors. And so part of that is part of managing someone's investment is to sit on the board of the companies to make sure the companies are delivering or providing value over time.
Yeah, thank you. That's much clearer in my head now. Is it unusual to only have 2 board directors on a company?
Not for a small company like this. So I think for more complex projects, remembering that Novacare is a financing entity, we provide finance and manage contractual relationships. So we don't actually deliver services.
Yep.
For a more complex company, you might have 5 or 6 directors, but I think general good governance suggests that large boards are actually bad governance because it restricts decision making.
Is not good governance having directors sort of turn over after a period of time, though, in terms of the amount of time you spend on a board?
Generally, yes, I would say absolutely yes. But one of the problems with this company is that once a company gets into financial difficulties, or once problems start to occur, it's very hard to step off a company.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. That's it from me for now.
I don't have any further questions. No questions from any other committee members.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. Do you still use KPMG as your tax audit?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for appearing again today.
problem at
Your cooperation with the inquiry is really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Secretariat will be in touch if there's any supplementary questions. Break followed by a private meeting. So the live stream won't commence again until 4:30 when we'll hear from New South Wales House. Welcome back to the final session of today's hearing. Thank you for making the time to give evidence today, and particularly on a repeat occasion to Ms. Kuhlander. Could we please start with your name and position, title, and swearing either the oath or the affirmation?
Yep, I can begin. My name is Emma Skulander. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Infrastructure and Asset Management and the Chief Executive of Health Infrastructure at New South Wales Health. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I'm Tony Gilbertson. I'm the Acting Chief Executive of Hunter New England Health. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now and about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Good afternoon. I'm John Barnard Richardson. I'm the Executive Director for Infrastructure, Planning and Sustainability at Hunter New England Local Health District. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Do you have an additional opening statement today?
No, we don't.
Thank you. I'll start with a couple of my own questions. There was an announcement from the Minister today leading into the budget that there will be $400 million allocated to infrastructure and rectification works in a number of categories very relevant to this inquiry. Are you able to inform us how much of that 400, if any, has been allocated to Calvary Mater Hospital?
Yeah, I can talk to that. So, as you say, the Minister announced this morning that $400 million. I think in his announcement he noted the process that would be undertaken in terms of allocating the funding. It will be a process that's managed within my division, but the funding allocation hasn't yet occurred, albeit some early projects have been identified where we know that we want to sort of start putting them into that bucket because, even publicly available information shows that there are some maintenance works that need to be done around the state, and so we're hoping that to put those through there. In terms of the process for that, though, the governance committee will be established, and obviously we're waiting for the budget to be available to us to do that. And then there's a set of criteria that they will be prioritised against. I do anticipate that any funding that we would be looking for could go through that process. So for Calvary Mater, if there's something that we want to put through that process, then certainly that is an avenue for us to seek funding of that, and the governance would assess a proposal that we put forward. Okay,
and those criteria for assessment, are those available yet?
At high level I could probably talk to that now, and it's I think in the media release they may have put in some criteria that we'd put forward, but certainly patient safety is always a priority for us, and service continuity. So you can imagine that they'd be two that would be very applicable in this scenario. We're also anticipating that a very high priority issue would be fixing mould issues, and really that relates to, in a lot of cases, HVAC, heating, ventilation and air conditioning systems upgrades, and so I anticipate there'll be a program of work around HVAC upgrades. So you could, there's an obvious alignment here with something for the Mater. I think just to note though, what we would be doing is considering that in the context of the whole state. There's a lot of hospitals across the state. I think with the Mater, we're very sure that work needs to be done, and we can perhaps come to that in our evidence today. We're also, in parallel, continuing to pursue the PPP for the cost of that, and if taxpayers shouldn't be funding that, then they shouldn't be funding that, and we'll continue with that avenue. But we actually know that work needs to be done, so it may be that we can use some funds and in parallel separate that contractual avenue from this.
Yeah, thank you. You've acknowledged that there's work that's known that's need to be done, and I'm aware of the report from June 2024, so 2 years ago, that the HVAC at the Mater had no dehumidification and was not up to task. That's obviously been known about for at least 2 years and still hasn't been rectified. It seems astonishing that this wouldn't automatically qualify for a program that's based on service continuity and patient safety when you've literally had wards evacuated.
Yeah, I agree that it's got very strong alignment. I think in terms, if I can just talk to the report a little bit, and we've spoken previously about the report that we've recently commissioned, and if it's okay, I'll hand to John in a second because he's got a bit of background about the report locally. I think the Calvaris report that you're referencing was done for a particular purpose at a point in time. We've used that actively in negotiations and discussions with Honeywell, which I think John can talk to, and it has informed some localised work that's been undertaken. My view in looking at this sort of holistically was the report didn't do what we needed it to do for the purpose that we need it today. I think it did at the time in terms of looking at, and we'll come to it, but looking at isolated issues, I guess. But what I needed to understand was this, the Calvary Mater Newcastle holistically. What is the full status of the building, including that HVAC, so that we can look at a few different things. One is what to do next in terms of urgent works and making sure that we spend money on good things that will actually solve the problem, looking at what's the core cause of some of these issues and making sure we fully understand them to then rectify. And then secondly, the sort of pursuing the legal avenues of who should have been doing this work over the period of time. John, do you want to just touch on the Calvaris report from your perspective?
Sure. So the Calvaris report was commissioned as a result of individual events that were happening and being observed at the Calvary Mater during that 23-24 period. What happened from there is that there were actions taken to try and seek for Novacare and Honeywell to remedy those individual asset failures. What the Calvaris report did was it was to look at smaller individual components of the system, and as Emma just said, what it didn't do was look at the holistic root cause. And what's happened from there is that we've taken those remediation steps and we've put in mitigation, and that has led ultimately to the procurement of the Jacobs report to look at the facility more holistically.
We just heard earlier this afternoon the toll it's taking on the staff for nurses having to deal with water and flooding, and their frustration that there haven't been any permanent rectification works. What are the barriers to this work just commencing, and then that the complex process of litigation and who should pay for it playing out after that work's commenced?
Yeah, there isn't a barrier to that. I suppose just to note that the cladding work that we're currently undertaking will go a long way to solving some of those water ingress issues that were advised of earlier today, and the reference to the pipe work and the systems that are temporarily in place there. That is obviously not the permanent fix. The permanent fix is fixing the integrity of the building. We've started those works in a location that will prioritise those areas so that as soon as feasible, they will be rectified. So I think there isn't a barrier there. That cladding work is underway. Unfortunately, the nature of the work is that it's quite complex and it's not quick. So as we said previously, it's a 14-month program. It is going well though. We've got the builder on site, but they're replacing panel by panel this cladding and making sure that whatever's behind the cladding is has integrity and making sure that the system that they leave there is waterproofed, and that's important. So if they're finding something behind the cladding, they're also having to then fix that. It's got to be done properly, and so this is a permanent fix to that. In relation to the HVAC, what we're waiting for is the Jacobs report. As I previously referenced, we're expecting a draft of that around now. I can't remember the exact date that I referenced, but it's around now. A draft of that has been received. I haven't personally seen the draft, but the team who is working within my team on this has seen a draft of that, and there's just some backwards and forwards with questions on that report at the moment. But it is highlighting, it's confirming what we thought, which is that there are HVAC issues at the facility. It validates the Calvaris report, is my understanding, but it also provides further depth of information that will enable us to put together a very clear programme of work. And then, the conversation will occur, of course, with Honeywell or with Novacare in relation to how we get that work done. But certainly that won't be holding up, as we've demonstrated already. We're able, if we need to step in and do work. And this is our priority as health. Our priority is that patient safety. And as soon as we've got that information, then we will look to start some work in that regard.
Okay. Now that draft's been received, and I think you just said it had validated the Calvaris review, what's the timeline from here in terms of remediation work for the HVAC?
Because I don't I don't have the draft to look at, and I also don't know if there's a building condition report, and then the next stage will be extracting from that what the scope of work is. I don't think this is a long exercise to get to that point, but I don't have a date for it. So perhaps I could take, if it's okay, to provide you with an approximate in relation to that. I am very, very aware that people are very keen for us to get on with that. I think just to note as well, it's quite likely to be fairly disruptive doing HVAC works, and so it's not. Hospitals are difficult things when you've got patients within them to do works too, and so we will also in parallel have to have a strategy to manage that disruption, and whether that's closing small areas at a time and moving around the facility. That's sort of what we generally would do. The nature of Hunter New England is that it's got a lot of facilities, and looking at whether services have to be temporarily provided from somewhere else for a period of time, or whether it's a service that's a day service that doesn't have to occur in that location. But those types of things we always go through when we're planning hospital refurbishment works. But doing works to HVAC is quite disruptive, and so the timeline, if the hospital wasn't open and didn't have any patients in it, would be very different to the real timeline where you've got to work through that in parallel. But we'll certainly be doing that as a next step in the planning.
Yeah, understanding the difficulty in working on a functioning hospital, do you accept also that there's a disruption associated with the status quo where wards have had to be closed?
Yes, I mean, I think that hearing again the evidence today around the staff disruption, and I've walked through those theatres that Camilla was referring to earlier, with Camilla actually, but and it was helpful, to sort of see that, to understand the perspective. And I'm terribly sorry for that disruption, because it is, I agree, completely unacceptable. And, we do need to step in as quickly as we can there to rectify that. But what we also want to do is make sure we're doing that in consultation with those people, so that we don't cause more unnecessary, disruption on the way through. So yeah, I appreciate there is no easy scenario in this, and there often isn't in hospital redevelopments or refurbishments, unfortunately.
Thank you. One more from me, and I'll go to my colleagues. We were just informed this morning about the new policy from the Clinical Excellence Commission about reducing the risk of aspergillosis. There's a section about mould testing, and particularly air sampling. And it said that air sampling for fungi, including aspergillus, is not generally useful, except, and one of the exceptions was in circumstances of hospital renovation or construction, that given the ongoing issues with the cladding, the flooding, the HVAC, per this document, is air sampling going to continue at the Mater?
Yeah, so I didn't know that document had been released until I saw it in your hand this morning, but the timing's good because it's useful to talk about. And it was one of the actions from the work that we had been undertaking in response to the aspergillus at RPA, and I think in the report that was released for RPA, one of the actions was to prepare this policy. It's been produced by the Clinical Excellence Commission, and they're certainly the experts in this field. They have consulted with us in terms of how construction work occurs and the interface on that. So it's really pleasing. I guess we anticipated it was going to be a useful document as a guidance document for us here. I think that as construction works are ongoing, certainly in line with that guidance, we would be following the guidance there. I think the challenge, and I'm sure in the inquiry this morning, Kathy Dempsey would probably have spoken to, sometimes air sampling sort of throws out results that it's very difficult to interpret, especially if you're not sort of monitoring trends. I think we have been doing that here at Calvary and using those results to inform decision making. I hope there comes a time when we can stop doing that air monitoring, because we've sort of got to a position that everyone's comfortable. But while we're doing construction works in line with the guidance, I would anticipate that would continue. I think if we weren't doing the construction works, we'd probably be having a conversation around what the right time to stop is, but you wouldn't want to do that until you're satisfied that you've got it under control.
Thank you. I'll go to my colleagues. Mrs. Connor.
Sarah.
I apologise. Mrs. Mitchell online.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. And apologies for not being there in person. I might just direct my questions through you, Ms. Gillender, but happy if the other witnesses are better placed to answer. It's just probably a bit easier being online. And I just want to probably cover some areas that the chair has already asked about, but I just have a couple more questions. So in relation to the $400 million announcement today, and I appreciate what you've said that there's still a process to work through, but I noticed in the announcement, obviously there's money set aside for sort of maintenance upgrades, and you talked about waterproofing and HVAC systems, but also talks about, I think, lift upgrades, fire safety upgrades, sort of CT scanners and some of that equipment. Are you able to tell us how much of the $400 million will be available for specifically the waterproofing and HVAC type upgrades as opposed to the other items that are listed in that announcement?
No, because we haven't allocated by program. What we will be looking to do is use those criteria and appreciate I've given a couple there. It's not the comprehensive list, and that probably will sort of be worked through as well in terms of what those criteria are, but we haven't allocated by program. What the intention will be is to allocate by priority against those criteria. So if it's a service disruption, patient safety sort of issue, you can imagine patient safety is probably at the top of the list. Well, if there's $100 million of patient safety ones that qualify, then great. That's what would take priority there, and of that there might be $20 million of lifts, but I don't know until that process is undertaken, and it's not being allocated by program.
Okay, no, thank you for clarifying. And obviously you said you need to wait for the budget, so you expect that process will take a little bit of time to work through in terms of where that money will actually flow to? Yeah,
I think so, but I don't think we have to wait until we've solved all the world's problems before we start doing things. And I think that there are some quite obvious ones that we would want to make sure that we got going with. If I can give an example, in the response to the standing order work, there was some outstanding, just from memory, and it's a bit of a loose memory, but there were some outstanding water ingress issues in northern New South Wales, and they required roof replacement, and that's quite a capital project, so it wasn't immediately resolved, and it sort of goes through a funding cycle. As you know, the process works. There's some of those that we would just jump on because it's obvious that work needs to be done to rectify the water ingress issues. It can go, quickly through a process and make sure that we're allocating the money sensibly, but there's some safety component to that we'd like to address. So I think potentially it won't be within the next, month that we can give a full list of what might be spent this year, but certainly in the next couple of months I'd hope to be able to share some projects that we were starting work on, because we want to get some of that money spent this year, because we do have things that we want to do and don't want it to be held up by process.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to also ask a few questions about the Calvaris report as well, and I again note that the chair's already touched on this. Could you just clarify, I think Mr. Barnard-Richardson, you said that report almost informed another report that you've now got that I think validates what the Calvaris report said. Am I understanding that correctly? Could you just talk me through that again?
Sure. So just to clarify, the Calvaris report was commissioned to address individual events that were happening at the time, of which we were actioning at that time and mitigating at that time. What we've found, though, is that through the accumulation of individual events, that this has led to the whole of facility Jacobs report that Emma's just spoken to, that is helping us understand what the root cause is and what the holistic solution needs to be to resolve those matters.
But my understanding is the HVAC system is effectively what the main part of the problem is at Calvary. Is that correct?
Aside from the leaking building, which we're fixing in parallel with the cladding work, but the moisture generally is the issue that's causing the mould, and the mitigation for that at the moment is lots of cleaning and monitoring, and that's only a short-term solution. So what is evident from the reports that we now have is fixing the building will certainly get to the root cause of that component, but doing some works at least to the air conditioning, and what we're just trying to get to the bottom of with this Jacobs report is how much work is it to the air conditioning, and what is the immediate spend that needs to occur there to actually rectify that for the long term, get the root cause rather than continuing to patch the solution.
But I suppose my point is, from sort of a patient or a staff kind of, or even frankly a sort of community view, if in 2024 there was a report, it was June 2024, so 2 years ago, the Calvaris report did talk about issues with HVAC, and notwithstanding the work you've done sort of in that time, but it does seem a bit sort of frustrating, I guess, that if this was identified 2 years ago, that it still hasn't been rectified, and there's just been more reports and more work done to tell you what the problem is. I guess why didn't something happen sooner after the Calvaris report came out in 2024?
I think, in fairness, the 2024 report, and look, this is before my time, so John, please jump in afterwards if this is my interpretation. The 2024 report was used to have several discussions with, in particular, Honeywell, but Novacare, and works were scoped as a result of that report, and some work has been undertaken as a result of that report by Honeywell. What we have now come to understand, and that's through, the increasing mould presence and the increasing issues as have been highlighted in the last 12 months, but we have now come to understand that it's sort of a more chronic problem across the facility, which is what the Jacobs report was intended to identify or I guess investigate. And so the Calvaris report was a point in time, but that point in time also, in fairness, was quite different to where we are today, with having much more visibility of the depth of the issues across the facility, which we just wouldn't have had at that time. John, is there anything in there that you want to add to? Or
I think from a Calvaris report perspective, it was looking at specific elements of the HVAC system, noting that the HVAC system is a facility-wide function. So it was looking at certain elements rather than the whole system. So as Emma said, what we're seeing now with the Jacobs report is that it's understanding how the whole HVAC system works across the facility.
Okay. Can I ask, and I know that Ms. McCoskey's on leave, and that's why she's not here. And again, I don't know, Mr. Gilbertson, whether you might be able to answer this as acting, but the committee also has an email from an individual from Plenary who had reached out to Ms. McCosker, I think it was in 2025, about 12 months after Calvaris report, asking for advice about how they should proceed with respect to the engineering recommendations in the Calvaris report. Do you have any insights into the role of Plenary, and again, what happened with that particular request?
Sorry, I don't know.
Okay. Is it possible, and again, I said I appreciate the reasons and valid reasons that Ms. McCosker's not here, but could you maybe take that on notice
Sure.
and see whether there's a response that we could get back if that's possible?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Chair, am I allowed to ask a couple more? Is that all right? I'm conscious of others, but I have just a couple.
Nobody's objecting. Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to go to the issue of abatements that we've also spoken about before, and Novacare were here this morning as well. Probably again through you, Ms. Gillander, if you're best placed to answer, but just in relation to the, I guess, health not pursuing the abatements and the amounts, I think at some of the initial inquiries, and again, I know we've had you appear a couple of times, but there's been differing advice in terms of how much was actually sort of held back from Novacare. At one point in some of the documents that we saw, it was $177 million, I think, in penalties that were not pursued. Can you just talk the committee through sort of how that level of abatements came to be incurred? And I think maybe you said sort of tens of millions before, but I want to understand how it got to be the scale that it did, and why the decision was made not to pursue any further.
yes, and I can appreciate that there's some confusion over the abatements amounts because they have changed over time. I think if I can start at the original evidence that I gave, which was, I think I quoted tens of millions of dollars for the abatements. That was my understanding and was an accurate figure at the time. So the abatements...
And I accept that, yeah.
And the abatements at that time were based on issues that had been identified, but they excluded what we refer to as 5D, which is a ward that's currently closed, that's been referenced a few times through the inquiry. The difference between then and now is this 5D closure, and the way that the abatements are applied under the contract and the way that we're following the contract, and we're sort of following the contract, we're using this contract as best we can to put the pressure for this Ward 5D to be fixed. And in that, we're applying the abatements as per the formula in the contract. And that formula in the contract is generating very significant numbers of abatements, which are racking up very quickly, month by month. And so since that first inquiry to now, the difference is quite simply this volume of abatements from 5D. Now, all of the abatements, as Ms. Rigg earlier referenced, are in dispute. And so when we talk about what's the real number, the number that Novacare referenced is aligned with our understanding of the number that we've applied under the contract. Sorry, that we have applied under the contract, but we haven't withheld all of that money. Obviously, it's a big number. We've withheld that smaller amount, which I think is somewhere around
3.7.
3.7. There you go. And so that's the reason for the difference in the numbers. In the Ward 5D, which is still closed, we're continuing to apply the abatements, albeit we're now into numbers that quite clearly are out of scale with the numbers that Ms. Rigg earlier was referencing in terms of, even the payments under the PPP. But it's because this is our mechanism at this stage to try and get that ward back online. And so we are continuing to try and work with Novacare to get the issues rectified so that 5D can be returned for use by Calvary, because at the moment that's out of use. So at this stage under the contract, that is the way of doing that until such time as the issues are resolved.
Okay. And then I just lastly, Chair, want to go to the issue of the Novacare offer for the buyback, which, again, I appreciate you appeared in the session just prior to Novacare appearing the last time that the committee met and had a public hearing, and so we didn't get a chance to ask questions about that, given that was new information to the committee that day. But I wanted to better understand from Health's perspective, I guess, when that offer came forward, who was involved in the discussions with Novacare? Were briefs provided to the Minister or to the Treasurer? How seriously was this looked at by the government?
So in terms of just the first part around the offer coming from Novacare, I think as referenced in my evidence that I subsequently submitted, and I do appreciate the timing of that was awkward. It was never my intention not to share that information with the committee. It was more that the confidential nature of the information, I was under the understanding that I couldn't share it at the time. So subsequently we've provided some evidence that confirms a meeting that was held with Novacare, and then subsequently some correspondence from them around the offer. Myself and Tracy McCosker generally have been in the conversations with Novacare. Can you just confirm the second part of your question, sorry, around briefings?
I just wanted to know in terms of, I guess, has the Minister been briefed, the Treasurer, been discussions with Treasury about that offer, and what was the internal process around consideration of it?
Yeah, so the internal process around consideration of it, we obviously sought more information from Novacare, as you can see in the correspondence, and the due diligence that we were able to undertake was very limited. I think that earlier the evidence was around, $2, and the abatements being the extent of what we would be taking on by buying Novacare. But there are a number of other liabilities that we were aware of, including the condition of the buildings, the disputes or arbitrations underway, of which we don't have full visibility of. There's a number of arbitrations underway with different parties, some of which have been referenced here, but whether that's the extent of it or not, I'm not sure. And taking that on was certainly, we felt was too significant a risk for us to take on, as well as the abatements. And so the offer was seriously assessed. There's a governance arrangement within Health and Treasury have a governance arrangement for Calvary Mater for the PPP. It was seriously assessed within that governance arrangement, and the options were therefore documented as best that we could. The information regarding the Minister and Treasury briefing, as we have previously stated, we're preparing options to go to government. Putting this to government, we did brief to government, but that information is cabinet in confidence because it was discussed in a cabinet meeting.
Okay, I have more, Chair, but I'll let others, and then if there's time. So thank you.
Mrs. Savell?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to you all for appearing, and again to Ms. Skulander for appearing before the committee. I wanted to ask, firstly, around some of the comments around the abatements, and I think it was clarified by Novacare in their evidence earlier today that it was around $300 million in disputed abatements. Is that your understanding of the sort of the current figure?
I think just shy of that, but somewhere around there. Yeah, it aligned with what our understanding was.
And so, because I think one of the questions that I asked earlier today was around the sort of the risk or the liability that the New South Wales government and the people of New South Wales would be potentially taking on. Novacare didn't seem to agree that there was much, if any, liability, and we're quick to point out that they are not owners of the building. But I just wanted to get your understanding of whether that is the case, given some of the evidence that we've heard today.
Yeah, I think safe to say we have a differing opinion to the evidence provided there by Novacare, but some of it does come down to how things will play out through arbitration processes. The condition of the building is significant because under the PPP, Novacare is required to return the building in a particular state. So the building needs to be, the building needs to be a particular condition when the PPP ends. And theoretically, it's been the purpose of these PPPs really. Theoretically, it's been established and then maintained well throughout so that then the building is returned in good condition. I think our assessment at the moment is that isn't the case, and so there's a gap between the current building condition and then where we think it's going to need to be at the end of the PPP. And so that becomes then a liability, we believe, but that will be, as Novacare provided evidence, that will be subject to some debate as to whose responsibility is what under the PPP contract. But that is one of the liabilities, certainly. I think also just the various different parties beneath Novacare are obviously also not in agreement on various things. I think it was referenced earlier around dispute with Lendlease, and certainly Honeywell, and therefore, we don't know the extent of that and don't have full visibility, but we can anticipate that there is certainly liability in that. So $2 for taking all of that on didn't to us seem like the right thing to do. However, with further investigation of that, perhaps further information could be provided that would give us a bigger picture to make the decision accurately. I guess we're being a bit vague on what it is because we weren't actually able to make the decision accurately, but based on all of that, knew that taking that on would be a substantial risk. Yeah.
And could you clarify as well whether or not, to your understanding, health were, and it might be a correct question again for Tracy McCosker, because I believe that's where the letter from Novacare was sent, but whether health were provided with a full copy of the report, the options analysis that was commissioned by Novacare, the EY Parthenon report, because they seemed to provide a redacted version in the letter.
Yeah, my understanding, and if it's okay, I might just take this on notice as well, but my understanding is that the report provided was the version that has the redacted information, and as was referenced by Novacare, that EY had requested the redaction of that component of it when it was then provided to us. That advice was provided. That was advice that Novacare commissioned, and so it was provided to us for information to inform, I guess, next steps in decision making. And it was useful because we could, see some work had been undertaken, and so it wasn't necessarily our place to request the redacted information, given that information had been commissioned by Novacare.
Sure. In terms of the Cavaris report that's been mentioned a couple of times already, could you clarify for the committee and from my memory, because I can't recall, who it was that commissioned that report?
That was Hunter New England.
So it was Hunter New England. Okay. And so is that a report that is publicly available?
The report was provided as part of the Standing Order 52.
So yes.
Yeah. So it's been issued publicly. I mean, not intentionally at the time, but through the standing order, it's been provided. And I think there's been a few different iterations of the report. The most recent iteration was pulling together any previous versions, but still in that 2024 report, we felt it gave us some information, but not the full picture that we required.
And so has that report been provided to the Work Health and Safety Committee, the Section 81 committees that are meeting at
Yes, so it's been shared with the Section 81 committee.
Wonderful, thank you. And the James report, what was that second report you were mentioning, the James report?
Oh, the Jacobs report
Jacobs
is the
report,
one.
sorry.
Jacobs is a consultant, and we shouldn't refer to it as that. It's a building condition report.
Yes.
But there is a consultant engaged to provide it. No, that's our fault because it's our shortening of it. That building is a building condition report. At the moment, it's being finalised.
Okay.
It's intended then to inform a number of different things, including the sort of broader options on next steps, which we really need to sort of use this building information to inform some of our decisions on next steps, particularly stepping in and doing any works that may need to be undertaken. And then, obviously also to have ongoing discussions with the parties.
Sure, thank you. In terms of the air quality testing, I just wanted to confirm whether or not that is being done in the outpatient areas of the hospital and the staff-only areas, so tea rooms and things like that.
I don't know the answer to that one.
The air sampling is being done in areas that were established previously as being identified as high risk. It's primarily looking at ensuring patient and staff safety in those areas. Other areas will be considered on a case-by-case basis. This is a clinical decision to help us understand what should be done, and will be led by a clinical direction in doing so.
I think just to note with that, the decisions made around that monitoring, etc., are informed by clinical review, and the Clinical Excellence Commission has been involved in that, who are the same authors of the document that the chair was referring to earlier. I think one action that certainly I'm conscious of is that final advice was just issued by CEC, and we will take the opportunity to ensure that we're aligning with that in what we're doing here.
Thank you, that's great to hear. The other part of the evidence that we heard earlier this morning was around the ward that is closed, and the fact that these are potentially winter surge beds that are used by Calvary, and there was a sort of a claim that that there'd been an offer at least to provide some sort of staffing or additional arrangements or the like. Could you comment on that and whether that was the case?
Yeah, I can have a go. I've been at not all but most of those meetings that were referred to. It was my recollection was slightly different around what was promised, but this is my recollection versus I think we probably will need to just go back and check the minutes, for example, of the meetings, because they're all documented. My recollection was there was a commitment from particularly the Secretary, but the Minister as well, around additional cleaning, which was referred to earlier, that we have implemented, and that additional cleaning I think has been quite effective so far, and will continue. The comment around additional capacity, my interpretation was related to if surge capacity was required, that there would be support for that, and my interpretation there was that, you know, it's part of a network of Hunter New England and that there's opportunity for support there. But I did pick up that there was a comment that something hadn't been actioned, and it just wasn't my recollection that that was the request. But Tony, do you want to just touch on surge capacity?
Yeah.
How the support would be provided?
Yeah, I mean, just acknowledging the staff at Calvary to start with, if I can, and the fantastic work they do every day to continue to provide great care. And to Emma's comment, I guess, they're a networked bunch of hospitals across the Newcastle Basin, and obviously further afield we have around 40 facilities or 27 facilities across the district. And I guess how we kind of surge across those facilities is you know, the work of, again, great clinicians moving patients to the right place at the right time. But the specific issue around 5D, I guess, understanding what additional support they may require, as particularly as you move into winter, is something we'll have to take on notice.
Yeah, I think we can certainly follow up on that and just make sure that we've interpreted the request appropriately. But my understanding was there wasn't an outstanding action in regard to that. Okay. But that is simply my understanding.
Sure. I think particularly on the basis of the evidence around surging to, say, recovery beds, I mean, that's obviously less than ideal. So if there is an arrangement in place that needs to be clarified, I think that would be, really well received. So yeah, thank you for taking that on notice. That's it for me at the moment, Chair. I'm just mindful. I think that's right. Sarah had.
I'll finish with my perhaps naively optimistic question. After there was a government commitment to return the Northern Beaches Hospital to public hands, there was obviously a complex period of transition, particularly to look after the staff and make sure that they and the patients they cared for were supported during that period. So particularly for Hunter New England, I appreciate that this is not something that government has actually taken a decision on yet, but has there been any work to look at what's happened in Northern Beaches or establish what the steps would be or what would need to be considered to ensure a smooth process should the Calvary Mater staff become Hunter New England staff?
Perhaps I can start and then I'll hand to you if that's okay. I guess just Northern Beaches is, I know this is hard to believe, but significantly more complex in its construct because of the clinical and then the non-clinical. And here we're talking non-clinical staff. So that's one aspect that simplifies it slightly. So government hasn't taken a decision on this, but as health, we have contingency planned for this scenario because we need to. And so we have done the work here, irrespective of decisions that need to be made in future. And part of that was in learning the potential voluntary administration, just thinking through the implications of that and wanting to ensure that we had a good plan in place if we need to step in on some of this. The employment arrangements are also more straightforward because a lot of these staff are already Hunter New England staff, but they're on secondment through the PPP. And so I think in terms of comparing to Northern Beaches, it's not a comparison really. There's some similar aspects that we can draw from our experience in, but it's a bit different. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's
covered it all.
Okay, thank you.
And if there's time.
We've just hit the end of time.
Okay, right.
You might need to put it in as a supplementary question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you again for appearing, particularly Ms. Culander, on a repeat basis. We appreciate your time providing evidence to the committee, and if there are supplementary questions, which it sounds like there will be, the Secretariat will be in contact with you about that.
Thank you.
And for those listening online, that's the end of the session today.